As happened somewhat often back during the Cold War, the MiG-23 Interceptor was adapted into a ground attack version, the MiG-23BN. Well, as the BN family of variants was further developed, it was eventually decided that the jet had diverged enough from the original MiG-23 to justify a new designation, and MiG-27 became the designation for subsequent ground attack planes in this larger family of jets. The first baseline MiG-27 in the early 1970s was similar to the earlier MiG-23BN, but it did have some notable changes. Its air intake system and engine exhaust were completely redesigned for better performance in low-level flight, the cockpit was redesigned, the landing gear was strengthened, and the targeting system was completely reworked. The MiG-27 was also kitted out to carry a new generation of precision-guided weapons, including laser-guided missiles. The jet was also equipped to carry the GSH-630 rotary cannon. This gun, really, it's something special. For some context, the primary use of this weapon is actually on naval vessels to shoot down incoming cruise missiles and low-flying aircraft. It's a somewhat rare example of a gas-operated Gatling-style rotary cannon with a rate of fire just north of 5,000 rounds per minute. This weapon was so intense that the vibrations and recoil when firing the thing would sometimes crack the internal structure of the MiG-27, cause parts of the plane to just randomly fall off, or damage instruments inside the cockpit. Anyway, the original MiG-27 entered service in 1975 with the Soviet Union, though it was often confused with the earlier MiG-23BN by Western observers due to the pretty close visual similarities. In Soviet service, the jet saw combat during the later phase of the war in Afghanistan and was upgraded several times until being retired in the 1990s. The jet was also exported to India and saw combat during the Kargil War in 1999 before being phased out in 2019. The only other export operator was Sri Lanka, which purchased refurbished MiG-27s from Ukraine in 2000 and used them extensively in its civil war against the Tamil Tigers insurgency. What we get in War Thunder is the MiG-27M, a jet fighter in Rank 7 of the Soviet tech tree at battle rating 11.0. I first covered this plane back in 2021, and it's changed a bit since then, so we're taking a look in my modern review format. This jet gets a full ballistics computer and the SPO-15LM radar warning receiver. This is a pretty useful set, and its functionality was recently upgraded. The MiG-27's primary weapon system is Godzilla's atomic fire breath, the GSH-630 cannon. This thing pounds its targets with over 80 rounds a second, but unfortunately the ammo count is very limited. For loadouts, the plane can take a fairly wide selection of missiles, bombs, gun pods, unguided rockets, and a drop tank. However, its best weapons can only be taken on the wing glove pylons. Your choice of air-to-air missiles is between the R-13M1 and the R-60M, like a lot of other Soviet lineage jets from this period. The R-13 has a longer range and is more resistant to countermeasures, but the R-60M is all-aspect, pulls harder, and you get twice as many. However, it still loves to chase flares. There are two choices for laser-guided missiles, the KH-25ML and the KH-29L. The 29 is generally a better weapon with a heavier warhead, but you can take the 25s on the fuselage pylons, and you can mix and match the two. I discuss laser-guided missiles a bit more later. Your TV weapons are the CAB 500 bomb and the KH-29T. The CAB 500 sometimes has a hard time locking moving targets, but you can take more of them. The KH-29T is one of my favorite air-to-ground weapons in the game, as it flies fast, can track moving targets, and hits incredibly hard. I only included one clip with the 29T, but really, when I'm playing for fun, this is my go-to weapon for close air support. Lastly, if you hate your life and enjoy pain, you can try taking the KH-23M manual command line of sight missile up into battle against fairly modern SPAA units. When it comes to flight performance, the MiG-27 is a dramatic change from the Yak-28 before it in the tech tree. And importantly, a lot of its performance characteristics depend quite a bit on its weapon load, more than they do in a lot of other jets. Generally speaking, the acceleration and rate of climb are pretty good overall, even with a heavy weapon load, but you're gonna notice a very pronounced difference in maximum speed. If you fly out clean, or for example with just a pair of R-13s, the MiG-27 can easily push past Mach 1.2 even at fairly low level, and it can rip itself apart in level flight. But if you load this thing up with a max load of bombs and a drop tank, you're gonna find it barely transonic for most of its flight envelope. The dogfighting agility isn't the best. The plane's rate of roll isn't very good, and it can't pull AOA in instantaneous turns anywhere near as well as most of the jets it fights. Its sustained turn rate is decent, but most of the time opponents will outmaneuver the MiG-27 fairly quickly. Try to avoid twisting dogfights, but if it happens, unsweep the wings and try to use the air brake to force an overshoot. Out in air battles, the MiG-27 is the stereotypical high-speed strike jet. It's got the air-to-ground ordnance to take out bases or clean up AI ground units, but it's not the best in air combat. The general meta of hitting a base then trying for an air-to-air kill or two is still perfectly fine with this jet, but just maintain realistic expectations, as people know the MiG-27 isn't a great dogfighter, and they tend to focus you and pile on. In recording footage for this review, I found myself getting group-focused by 4 or more opponents far more often than in planes I've flown recently, even while most of my team was still up. Seriously, J7Ds and stuff will fly halfway across the map to try and fight this thing because they think it's just a free kill in a dogfight. It was actually pretty annoying. Your saving grace is the ridiculously inappropriate firepower coming out of the cannon that will simply remove anything it hits if you can line up a shot. Try to avoid prolonged dogfights whenever possible, though. Now, out over a ground battle is where the MiG-27 comes into its own. There are still some caveats. First, the laser-guided weapons. As you can see in a couple of the clips I included, the laser targeting system on the MiG-27 is a very early model with almost no zoom functionality. What's worse, the nose of your plane obscures the view because they placed the camera's point of view up in the cockpit instead of down on the tip of the nose where it should be. This makes getting direct hits with the laser-guided missiles a lot more difficult than in most other jets with a targeting laser. The TV-guided weapons tend to be more reliable, and they're fire and forget, but be careful. It can be tricky sometimes to lock on a target as opposed to locking the ground at the target. And I find the Cab 500 bombs in particular seem to have a difficult time locking up moving targets, so just be careful. Of course, when you're out of ordnance, the cannon on this thing can delete just about any tank in this bracket, so if you're willing to get close and risk taking some fire, it's always an option. Generally though, you'll want to get used to going back to the airfield to reload, since the MiG-27's overall payload is pretty small. Visually, I've always liked the look of the larger MiG-23 family, and the 27 is no different. It just looks fast, and the paint job you get for it is a pretty decent camo pattern. No problems on the 3D model, and the afterburner even looks pretty good these days. Landing the MiG-27 is, again, something you should get used to doing over and over because of its light payload. Thankfully, it gets a pretty effective air brake, and it handles reasonably well on final approach with the wings unswept. You can put the gear out at over 600 kilometers an hour, and the landing flaps can deploy a bit over 450, but make sure the wings are fully unswept first. Inside the cockpit, you get a huge targeting monitor, pretty good visibility externally, and the SPO-15 radar warning receiver finally works. I really enjoyed flying this thing in VR, and I've got no complaints. To close out on the MiG-27M. This jet gets a fairly good supply of countermeasures, it's got really powerful weapons for close air support, and it carries the GSH-630 cannon. However, its overall payload is fairly light, it doesn't get a radar set, and it's not the best in air combat. The final verdict on the MiG-27M is that this jet has a fairly narrow niche as close air support, but if that's what you're looking for, this can be a pretty fun option to use. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this next one.